Whenever people talk about the greatest of classic platformers from the 80s and 90s, we hear a lot about titles like Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and Sonic 3 and Knuckles. These games often make it onto the top 10 lists of their respective consoles. If you've seen my reviews, then you'll know that I happen to enjoy all of those quite a bit, though I do still maintain that the Genesis version of Sonic 2 can be unnecessarily frustrating for first-time players. While those games are certainly great on their own terms, I've always found it disappointing that the Donkey Kong Country series hasn't gotten quite the same attention. Sure, the series has always had its fans, but more recently it seems that parts of the gaming community, and especially newcomers, have been somewhat critical of these titles. People only like them for their graphics, they say. The games have too much trial and error, they say. The gameplay isn't all that interesting, they say. While I can see why new players may make these claims and will respect them for making them, I don't think enough credit is being given here. The Donkey Kong Country trilogy is more than shallow, pre-rendered graphics and frustrating trial and error difficulty. I think that if one were to give these games a proper chance, they'd find that they deserve to rank up with the Marios and Sonics of their time. They're fast-paced, well-designed, reasonably challenging, and just all-around fun and enjoyable games. I'd even go as far to argue that one of them is the best classic side-scrolling game I've ever played. Yeah, you heard me. I know that's pretty high praise, and coming from someone who didn't even experience the Donkey Kong Country trilogy during its original run in the mid-90s. Like perhaps many others of my generation, I experienced them first through their GBA remakes. I wasn't exposed to the SNES originals until they came out in the Wii Virtual Console. Both fans and non-fans of the series alike have seemed to poo-poo the GBA remakes as second-tier versions that are quite clearly inferior. Just like how the Mario fanbase has seemed to ignore the Advance remakes, the DKC remakes for GBA have been similarly spurned simply for their being remakes. I won't try to deny that my exposure to these versions in my formative years of gaming hasn't affected my views of them. Even I can succumb to the subtle and wraith-like pressures of nostalgia. Still, I consider this to be yet another case where the remake reactionaries have not given credit where credit is due. While the GBA remakes might be inferior to the SNES originals in some aspects, I'd argue that they also surpass them in others. That's why, as with previous ROR installments, I wish to give both versions an in-depth review to see how the remakes attempt to recreate, build upon, and possibly even surpass the originals. We're going to be looking at each installment in the original trilogy, and their remakes for GBC and GBA. I'll also be dedicating a single video to the Donkey Kong Land trilogy, along with a short ROR of DKC-1 on Game Boy Color. If you were expecting a Donkey Kong Country Returns ROR, I'm sorry, but I don't have a 3DS capture, so I have no way to record for it. For this marathon, we're sticking to the rare stuff. This is Donkey Kong Country Remake or Rebreak. Our story begins in 1981. A Nintendo artist named Shigeru Miyamoto was charged with taking existing arcade hardware and designing a new game for penetrating the North American arcade scene. The result was Donkey Kong, a puzzle platformer which saw protagonist Jumpman making his way through a construction site and other settings to rescue his girlfriend Pauline from an escaped zoo ape. The game was enormously successful and spawned two arcade sequels, Donkey Kong Jr. in 1982 and Donkey Kong 3 in 1983. Both Donkey Kong and Jumpman, who was later renamed Mario, would go on to become two of the most iconic characters in Nintendo's lineup. After the early 80s, the Donkey Kong franchise would fall in popularity as new and even more popular Nintendo franchises like Super Mario and The Legend of Zelda made their mark in the growing home console market. The classic Donkey Kong gameplay formula would see its last iteration on the Nintendo Game Boy in 1994, which finally introduced DK's characteristic red tie. The gameplay of Donkey Kong 94 would be reincarnated 10 years later in the puzzle platformer Mario vs. Donkey Kong series. Besides the Game Boy remake, the Donkey Kong franchise had largely fallen from popularity by the early to mid-90s. Meanwhile, in merry old England, British developer Rare was doing pretty well from titles in its NES portfolio, that being such titles as Wizards and Warriors, Snake Rattle and Roll, RC Pro-Am, and of course, Battletoads. Using their profits, the firm purchased a number of fancy SGI computers, the same technology behind the digital effects in Jurassic Park. Around the same time, Nintendo visited Rare and was so enchanted by their development chops that they purchased a plurality of the company's stock, turning Rare into a second-party Nintendo developer. Rare was then commissioned to make a new title for the Super Nintendo using their SGI technology, and eventually the green light was given to develop a game based on the Donkey Kong IP. True to their greatest successes in the past, Rare's new Donkey Kong project took the form of a 2D platforming game, using SGI to model the characters in 3D, and then rendering them into sprites usable by the SNES. This advanced computer modeling process allowed the new title to offer visuals that were revolutionary for their time. To complete their reboot, the artists at Rare decided to abandon Donkey Kong's classic arcade look in favor of the new swirly-haired redesign we know today. Rare also redesigned Donkey Kong Jr., but when the producers at Nintendo complained that he looked too different, the redesigned Jr. was renamed Diddy Kong after a British slang word for small. The project, titled Donkey Kong Country, was finally released in November of 1994 after an intense marketing campaign by Nintendo, and went on to become one of the highest-selling and highest-rated games on the system. The game was such a hit that it spawned 2 direct sequels, 3 spin-offs on the Game Boy, a racing game, and a collectathon platformer for the Nintendo 64. Considering how gamers usually hate reboots, that's pretty impressive. While recently, the original trilogy saw a digital re-release on the Wii U, along with the Donkey Kong Land trilogy on the 3DS. At the heart of this lasting legacy is the reboot that started it all, Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. How well does DKC1 hold up, and how does the Game Boy Advance remake stack up in comparison? As with most classic platformers, the plot isn't groundbreaking by any means, but it's still worth bringing up in this review. In the SNES version, the only sort of story exposition you get is Donkey Kong hanging his head in shame after discovering his missing banana hoard. The GBA remake adds a short intro cutscene that gives a more detailed helping of exposition than the SNES original. Our tale takes place on the conveniently named and shaped Donkey Kong Island, where the titular mountain gorilla and his relatives live in peace with the island's other inhabitants. Donkey Kong, who is actually the grandson of the original arcade Donkey Kong, has amassed a gigantic banana hoard under his house by unknown means. One night, Donkey Kong asks his cousin, a New World monkey named Diddy Kong, to stand guard over his banana hoard as part of his video game hero training. Only shortly after assuming his post, Diddy is attacked by a group of invading crocodiles known as the Kremling Crew, a nefarious cohort of cutthroats led by the kooky King K. Rool. The lizards shove Diddy into a barrel and chuck him in the bushes, and then proceed to rob DK's entire banana hoard. Donkey Kong is woken the next morning by his grandfather, Cranky Kong, who claims to be the Donkey Kong from the arcade original. When informed that his hoard has been pilfered, an enraged Donkey Kong promises to beat every single banana out of the Kremlings and send the scaly crusaders back from whence they came. Like I said, the plot's nothing too terribly special, but I can at least give it credit for keeping things lighthearted and fun. I couldn't possibly write a DKC review without mentioning dem aesthetics. In terms of graphics and presentation, I honestly think this game still looks fabulous even by today's standards. The character models may look dated when viewed up close, but when pre-rendered into sprites, they still look amazing. The character sprites are nicely detailed, brightly colored, well shaded, and brilliantly animated. The overall art direction manages to look somewhat realistic, while still being cartoony enough to avoid dem Uncanny Valley feels. The game is also quite charming. I love how all the enemies have goofy and over-the-top animations. I love how DK and Diddy do a little dance whenever you finish a stage. I love how whenever you damage Master Neki, the tops of his eyelids somehow detach from his head in a comedic fashion. I love how whenever you lose a bonus stage, Diddy throws his hat on the ground and starts jumping on it in frustration. Despite its realistic look, the game knows full well that you're playing as a gorilla and a monkey trying to retrieve bananas from a bunch of lizards. The environments make good use of parallax scrolling in back and front layers, and occasionally feature some awesome weather effects. Ropey Rampage, for example, has a stormy rain effect with lightning flashing in the background, while the Orangutan Gang features a swoony sunset look. Some stages, like Coral Capers, bust out some kick-ass Mode 7 effects. Overall, by any measure of graphical quality, the visuals in the original SNES version of Donkey Kong Country have aged very well and remain impressive even to this day. But how about the GBA version? A lot of fans and reviewers have often described the portable remakes as graphically inferior, and I can see why. But as I said in the Mario RORs, I think that a lot of people have forgotten that the GBA screen was only 240 by 160p, and that it wasn't backlit. When viewed on an actual GBA screen, particularly a GBA SP, all of these games still look really nice. When viewed off of a Game Boy player, which is the only means I have of recording these games, the graphics look blurrier and oversaturated due to lackluster scaling and TV backlighting. What I'm getting at here is that while SNES games remade on the GBA may or may not look as good as their Super Nintendo brethren, it's worth remembering that the games look the way they do because developers had to get around screen size and lighting constraints. That all being said, how does the GBA DKC compare to the SNES original? I would say that the SNES version is the better looking of the two. The GBA version sports oversaturated coloring and lacks the detail of its home console cousin. While all of the graphical effects from the original are present and accounted for, they don't look quite as impressive. When viewed by the system's own standards, however, I'd consider the GBA Donkey Kong Country to be one of the best looking games on the system. The sprite work still looks really nice, and the environments are still good on the eyes. While the special effects may not look as good as before, it's still impressive and commendable that the wizards at Rare were able to pull off these console quality effects on a portable system. The SNES version is still the better looking game at the end of the day, but considering all the GBA's technical limitations, I still consider the two versions to be at least comparable. What about the soundtrack? I'd say that Donkey Kong Country and SNES sounds just as good as it looks. Taking the musical chairs are a trio of well-known Rareware musicians. Evelyn Fisher-Novakovic, yes she did get married, Robin Beanland of Conker's Bad Fur Day fame, and the illustrious David Wise, my favorite video game composer. DKC has received a lot of acclaim for its music, and while it's not my personal favorite soundtrack in the series, it's certainly a great assortment of tunes in its own right. The instrument quality is top-notch for a Super Nintendo game, the tunes themselves are catchy and upbeat, and each track offers ambience to draw the player into the environment. Every gamer worth their salt can hum DK Island Swing, the track that plays in levels like Jungle Hijinks. How about the fantastic title theme, which is a remix of the song from the original arcade game? How about the playful silliness of Bonus Room Blitz? How about the subtle atmosphere of aquatic ambience? How about the catchy beat of Fear Factory? My absolute favorite track though has to be Life in the Mines. The slamming pickaxes in the background double as ambience and percussion, and the over-the-top winds are not only very catchy, but also emotionally moving in a strange kind of way. Beyond the AAA tracks in DKC, there are also a handful that are just good but not great. I've never personally been a fan of Voices of the Temple. The melody seems to have been overshadowed by the ambience. I could say the same thing about Northern Hemispheres and Misty Menace. Tracks like Treetop Bop and Minecart Madness are pretty catchy, but somewhat lacking in ambience. Generally though, the SNES soundtrack gets a gold star from me. So how does the GBA version compare? Like with its graphical capabilities, I think that the Game Boy Advance has been unfairly shat upon when it comes to music. I'll say right now that when it comes to sound, the Super Nintendo is one of my absolute favorite systems. And while I do think that the Game Boy Advance sounds inferior in comparison, I also think that writing it off as crap isn't being fair. I've often heard the GBA version of the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack described as quote-unquote butchered in comparison to the original rendition. I'll accept that many people prefer the SNES version of the soundtrack, and that's perfectly fine, but butchered? Really? Once again, I feel like what people mean when they say that is, it doesn't sound exactly like the original, so therefore it's bad. As in the Mario RORs, I must stress that the GBA's hardware is different from the Super Nintendo's. Expecting all the tracks to sound exactly the same is unrealistic. I prefer to think of them as remixes, like when someone takes a Super Nintendo song and turns it into a Sega Genesis song. Part of the fun for me is seeing how the composers will take a great track like DK Island Swing and turn it into something new using different hardware. And in general, I think that the GBA version is one of the best sounding games on the system. Hell, I'll even say that I actually prefer some of the tracks in this remake over the SNES versions. The DKC title theme has never sounded better than it does here, especially with the badass intro cutscene playing in the background. I can say the same thing about the game's version of Simian Segway, Ricky's Cabin, Treetop Rock, Bad Boss Boogie, and even Aquatic Ambience. Other tracks like Northern Hemispheres, Misty Menace, Voices of the Temple, and Ice Cave Chant actually approximate the SNES versions pretty well. The game also features a handful of original tracks, and they're all great. Candy Kong and Funky Kong both got new theme songs, and I prefer them over the versions they replaced. The Candy dance sequences and Funky fishing sequences also sound great. Additionally, I also find myself preferring the sound design. While the music may sound kind of buzzy at times, I think the new sound effects have better clarity and pop more than their Super Nintendo counterparts. That being said, there are still plenty of songs that don't sound quite as good as the SNES versions. I think that Gangplank Galleon, Cave Dweller Concert, DK Island Swing, Fear Factory, and Credits Concerto are all good examples. Overall though, I think the GBA version sounds better than it's given credit for. I find the two versions to be equal when considered in light of their respective strengths and weaknesses. The remixers did a good job here. Let's move on to DAT gameplay. Donkey Kong's trek will take him through 6 worlds of about 5 or 6 levels, each capping off with a showdown against one of the Kremlin commanders. One thing that's kind of annoying about the SNES version is that in order to save the game, you have to reach the candy save point for that world, and its positioning can be completely random. In Vine Valley, it's right at the beginning. In Gorilla Glacier, which is probably the hardest world in the game, it doesn't show up until the very end pretty much. Additionally, you can't travel between worlds unless you reach the Funky's flight location for a given world. To be clear, it all works just fine, and I'm just grateful that the game has a save feature and unlimited continues. But I can imagine that newer players might not care for these design choices, and this is one thing that the GBA version improves upon. While on the overworld screen, simply push start and you can save the game or call Funky with the push of a button. While experienced players like me won't need it, newer players might consider this a major improvement. Moving on to the actual platforming, the mechanics are simple but fun. Donkey Kong can run and jump to traverse through terrain, barrel roll into enemies from any angle, chuck a variety of barrels to defeat enemies, and slap at enemies to get free goodies. A more advanced move that I love to death is that if you roll off a ledge and press the jump button in midair, you can extend the length of your jump and better deal with some of the game's trickier platforming. Not far into the first stage, you'll recover Diddy Kong from a buddy barrel. Diddy has a similar moveset to DK, except he can cartwheel farther than DK can roll, and appears to jump slightly higher. If you're hit as DK, you'll automatically swap to Diddy Kong, so in that sense the other Kong doubles as a life bar of sorts. Donkey Kong can also defeat certain tougher enemies that Diddy can't. The control is tight, responsive, and easy to learn. The physics are floaty enough to give you extra control and precision when in midair, while not so floaty that you take forever to land. Regarding the control, my only real complaints for the SNES version is that unlike the sequels, the Kongs won't hold in place when throwing barrels in midair, and that they slow to a crawl when they finish a rolling move, so you have to keep jumping around to keep the pace. Now, I don't know if it's just my imagination, but I swear the controls are slipperier in the GBA remake, which can be really annoying for later levels that require more precision platforming. Both characters also seem to roll farther than in the Super Nintendo version. Let me be clear that the GBA version is far from unplayable. I still think it controls pretty well overall. I just think that if you're like me and used to the way the Kongs handle in the Super Nintendo, you might find yourself struggling in levels where bottomless pits are more abundant. If you haven't played either version, then you'll have nothing to worry about and should adjust to either just fine. Together, the pair of primates must hop and bop their way through 40 action-packed stages, each sporting a unique and quirky name. While bashing through hordes of Kremlin baddies, the Kongs will also nab extra lives by collecting bananas and balloons and tracking down the 4 Kong letters in a given stage. The overall level design keeps things straightforward, fast-paced, and linear. Just the way I like it. Stages come in many different flavors, with 2 or 3 stages each making use of the same design themes. Some take place in jungle environments, others in factories, even more in a variety of mine locations, and still more underwater. The game's jungle island setting doesn't make for the most interesting level types from a stage hazard and set piece perspective, but I'd still contend that the game's levels are plenty memorable. Each stage has its own unique gimmick that separates it from the others. Ropey Rampage introduces swinging ropes, Manic Mincers is overrun with giant spiky wheels, and Oil Drum Alley is populated with open flaming oil barrels. A lot of these gimmicks repeat and mix and match in later stages, but I still find that there's enough new going on for the game to remain interesting the whole way through. It's not like Yoshi's Island where the game drags on for way too long and gets stale about 3/5 in. Also scattered throughout the stages are 4 animal buddies: Rampy the Rhino, Winky the Frog, Expresso the Ostrich, and Ungard the Swordfish. Squawks the Parrot also makes an appearance as a glorified flashlight in Torchlight Trouble. You can think of the animal buddies as the power-ups of the Donkey Kong Country franchise. In addition to adding an extra hit, each buddy has their own unique abilities and allows you to access new areas of a stage. I enjoy the animal buddies quite a bit, and as much as I love Returns and Tropical Freeze, I think Retro Studios really dropped the ball by including only Rambi for a handful of levels. In addition to the buddies themselves, a plethora of gold statues are also plastered throughout the levels. Collecting 3 of a kind will send the Kongs to a bonus stage where you play as that animal buddy collecting statuettes of their likeness. Collecting 100 will snag you an extra life, and hidden giant statues will double your count. While these animal bonus stages are great for racking up extra lives, I also think they can be really annoying. There's nothing quite as frustrating as almost finishing a semi-annoying stage like Treetop Town. only to suddenly collect a third espresso statue and get kicked back to the checkpoint. Though a fun distraction, I honestly don't miss the animal bonuses in the sequels. While the stages are very enjoyable, the boss fights are kind of disappointing. The first boss is a complete joke, and the rest aren't much better. Beyond the last 3 bosses, I don't find them all that interesting. This is one aspect where I feel the GBA remake has improved upon the SNES version. Queen Bee, much like King Zing, will now spawn zingers in various protective formations that you'll have to take out to damage the boss. It's a lot better than the SNES version where Queen Bee does nothing but fly in a sine wave and run into your barrels. Billy Naughty will now drop giant stalactites from the ceiling, and Master Neki Sr. is now accompanied by his junior variety. I also like how Cranky now makes snarky comments whenever you defeat a boss. I still think the sequels have much better boss fights than this first game, but the GBA version is definitely an improvement over the original. Besides its graphical and musical excellence, the Donkey Kong Country series is well known for its difficulty. While DKC is certainly hard, it also understands the crucial difference between difficulty and challenge. Challenge involves the gradual development of a skill set through engagement with the game's mechanics, level design, and set pieces. Challenge is what makes a hard game rewarding and fun to play, because the player experiences a journey of growth in their reflexes and abilities. Difficulty, on the other hand, just means that a game is hard and takes longer to beat. There is an important difference between the two. Donkey Kong Country is a game that understands, unlike Sonic 2, that real challenge doesn't come from a noxious cocktail of unforeseeable instant kill hazards, limited continues, and trial and error memorization. DKC knows that a better way to deliver a lasting, rewarding, and fun challenge comes from the mastery of a few simple mechanics, well-structured and straightforward level design, and a sufficiently lenient margin of error. After all, I can't really improve if I can't keep trying. While that's not the only way to go about it, it is what I consider the ideal and competent way, and overall, I find that both versions of Donkey Kong Country are well designed and fun to play in addition to being challenging. The mechanics control exactly how you'd want them to, and are simple to learn but challenging to fully master. The levels are well structured and offer checkpoints to keep you focused on that latest tricky chunk of level design. The stages are littered with bananas, balloons, and Kong letters for scoring extra lives, so even the least skilled players should find themselves amply equipped for the challenge ahead as long as they're willing to persevere. As an aside, I also think that the little jingle that plays when you lose a life is my favorite of any game series. As well designed as DKC's challenges overall, it does hiccup on occasion. A lot of people have criticized the Game Boy Advance version for screen crunch, but I find that the SNES version can be just as guilty. While the player sprites are amazingly detailed, they're also very large. Although the camera does compensate for the constrained 4:3 aspect ratio by shifting the player sprite to the opposite side of the screen, things can still sneak up on you if you're moving too fast, or if the camera doesn't feel like being cooperative. Poison Pond has got to be the worst stage in this regard. Not only does the putrid green fog make it hard to see, but the camera never seems to be in a good position to see what's above you or below you. Take this section. I can't see where the bite sides are until they're right on top of me. How about this section where the squidges are flying in diagonally from the bottom left with no warning? That's annoying, and I'm surprised that no other reviewer has ever called attention to this faulty camera design. Generally, I find that the GBA version has better visibility than the SNES version, due to the wider aspect ratio and the smaller and less detailed sprites. Stages like Poison Pond and Ice Age Alley aren't nearly as annoying, and the camera's positioning also feels much more dynamic than the SNES version. That's not to say I didn't run into the occasional visibility problem. Minecart Carnage was a real pain in my ass, and that's because the crash Kremlings kept slamming into me from off screen without warning. Generally, however, the camera is cooperative enough in both versions for both to remain perfectly playable and legitimately challenging. A few bad levels do not a bad game make. In case the stages on their own don't leave you satisfied, dumb bonus rooms should help fill the gap. Each stage in Donkey Kong Country features about 3 hidden bonus rooms, which will each transport you to a minigame or simple platforming challenge to nab Kong letters and extra lives. The GBA version also adds a title card for the different types of bonus rooms to match the sequels. If you want to complete the game fully to 101% in either version, you'll have to visit every bonus room in every level. May I say, how much I prefer these bonus rooms over the classic Sonic special stages. Although the game's level design remains simple and straightforward throughout, the bonus rooms allow for a decent amount of exploration without making the games unnecessarily complicated. It's also nice that the game keeps track of your bonus room tally by marking fully explored stages with an exclamation point. Take that, Super Mario World Dragon Coins! I find that seeking out the bonus rooms make plowing through Donkey Kong Country a little more engaging than the standard romp, though getting in the bonus rooms can be annoying on occasion. That being said, fuck Ice Age Alley and the Orangutan Gang for making me drag Espresso's sorry ass through half the stage. While Cranky Kong will give you hints if you visit him at his cabin, many of the bonus room locations are so obscure that you'll never find them without a guide. I think the absolute worst example is an Oil Drum Alley. You have to first open a bonus room in a wall. Then, you have to hit the switches so that you select the banana. To be clear, if you do this in any other bonus room, you lose and get kicked out. By doing this, you'll get a barrel. Then you have to jump toward the wall while carrying the barrel so that you'll break open the wall and walk through the resulting hole at the same time. If you do not do this, you'll open the wall but get kicked out before you can enter. How the hell was a kid, or a squid for that matter, in the 90s without internet supposed to figure all that out? The SNES version also doesn't reward you all that well for your trouble. All you get is a congratulatory line of dialogue from Cranky during the game's ending. At least Sonic 1 bothered to give you a little cutscene. It's definitely one of those instances where the journey itself is the reward. So I recommend bonus rooms to completionist and hardcore Donkey Kong Country fans only. The GBA version is a lot better when it comes to bonus rooms and completionism. For one thing, it adds a Super Mario Advance 2-like status screen to help you keep track of bonus rooms and Kong letters. For another thing, it adds a neat scrapbook mechanic. You can earn pictures for the book by defeating certain enemies, entering secretive areas in the levels, and for various other things. In order to complete the book, you have to find all the bonus rooms and Kong letters in the game. Some of these photos are hidden in pretty obscure locations. One such photo requires you to slap Queen Bee in the stinger, because that's real obvious. Thankfully, Cranky Kong does offer some hints to help you find these obscure photos. You can find even more photos by visiting the other Kongs. Candy Kong's save point has become a dance studio where you can play a series of ever more challenging dance rhythm games. While I really enjoy this minigame, I do find that it can be somewhat picky about button input, and one of the scrapbook photos requires you to play one of these rhythm games and get all perfects. It's about as much fun as it sounds. Funky Kong's Flights now sports a fishing minigame where you attempt to satisfy a special condition, usually catching a certain amount of a specific fish. They're also pretty fun, though I do find that the boat is kinda sluggish. While the scrapbook can be annoying to fill up at times, I did find it to be a fun side quest overall, and to make bonus rooms more rewarding than they were in the SNES original. I think that pretty much covers the gameplay, so let's jump into the spoiler section.
Ah, spoiler alert!
After laying the smackdown upon Master Nicky Sr. in Chimp Caverns, King K. Rool conveniently weighs anchor nearby. DK and Diddy Kong then board a ship, the Gangplank Galleon, in a final showdown to retrieve the Kong Banana Horde. A lot of people seem to really like the final boss theme, but I honestly think it pales in comparison to Crocodile Cacophony and Big Boss Blues in terms of final boss music. It's still a decent final boss theme, but one of the best tracks in the series? I don't think so. King K. Rool himself is a fun and challenging final boss. His moveset is simple to pick up on, and his attacks are still perfectly dodgeable, but he'll still manage to keep you on your toes. If I had any complaints, I do think that the fight structure gets a little repetitive. He just keeps repeating the same attack, only adding an extra move each time. Oh well, at least the fight is relatively short. Let's watch the credits roll. Coding, characters, coloring, concept, commander. I don't know about you guys, but I always thought that was cute. 3 more bonks to the noggin will put the king out of commission and recover the last of Donkey Kong's bananas. What follows is a fun cutscene where the different enemies of the game will each parade across the screen. In the SNES version, they just show up at DK's house, but in the GBA version, they'll do a bunch of detailed animations over and under the deck of Gangplank Galleon. You also get a short cutscene that helps bridge Donkey Kong Country into Diddy's conquest. Sure, the ending's nothing special, but it is pretty satisfying. Credits Concerto is also one of my favorite tracks in the game, so that certainly helps. So, Remake or Rebreak. What's the verdict? I've got to admit that this particular game treads that fine line between remat and remake. like the Mario remakes often did. On one hand, the graphics don't look quite as good and the sound requires an appreciation to be fully enjoyed. I also find that the control in the SNES version is a little tighter and less slippery, and that a handful of levels got somewhat more annoying in the transition. On the other hand, the game looks and sounds great by GBA standards, improves the camera and visibility, touches up the save feature and travel between worlds, improves the boss fights, updates the bonus room system, adds new story cutscenes, introduces new minigames, and tops everything off with a neat scrapbook mechanic. It also features a new time attack mode that I'm sure will appeal to someone. I totally understand it if others consider this game a remake, but I think it's done more than enough to earn the remake score. So yeah, Remake. It's a solid re-release that touches up on the problems of the original and adds new content. And that's what I'm looking for in a good remake. That being said, which version do I prefer? I'd honestly have to vote SNES for a few personal reasons. The slightly better control makes a big difference for me. And while the camera save and travel issues can be annoying, I've played the game so many times that they don't really get in my way anymore. Still, I enjoy both versions about equally, and often alternate between them when replaying the game. How about Donkey Kong Country as a game on its own? In the past, I've spent most of my time with the sequels, often to the neglect of this first game. Once I started practicing up for the Let's Play and Game Mavericks and began to go after bonus rooms, I gained a deeper appreciation for Donkey Kong Country 1 that I didn't have before. Sure, both versions have the occasional instance of annoying level design, can have spotty visibility at times, but the game is so well designed and fun to play in almost every other aspect that I find it hard to care. The superb graphics and sound also don't hurt. Donkey Kong Country is a fantastic game for the Super Nintendo and Game Boy Advance libraries, and provided that you're up to the challenge, I would recommend it wholeheartedly to anyone with the interest or curiosity. The Super Nintendo version is now available on both Wii and Wii U Virtual Console for $8, and you can snag the GBA version off of Amazon for about $12 used. Which version would I recommend? If you haven't already played the game, odds are you have little experience with the genre. If that's you, or if you're a completionist looking for something that'll keep you busy for a while, the GBA version is for you. If you'd prefer to play the game on the big screen, then go for the SNES version. Either way, I think you'll find yourself satisfied. I love Donkey Kong Country, and I think you will too if you give it a chance. Donkey Kong Country did pretty well during its original run in 1994. Reception from gamers and critics alike were positive, and sales were through the roof. And as we all know, well-received and selling games are all but guaranteed to get a sequel. I'm disappointed to say that I couldn't find out much about this game's development history, except that a Virtual Boy version was planned but then cancelled after that system flopped. Regardless, a sequel did surface in November of 1995, entitled Donkey Kong Country 2: Diddy's Conquest. You wouldn't believe how long it took me to recognize the pun in the title. Like its prequel, DKC2 received accolades from critics and was a commercial success as well. DKC2 appears to be the fan favorite of the original trilogy, though plenty will argue that Donkey Kong Country 1 is the better game. One of them is Stuttering Craig of ScrewAttack.com, who insists that Donkey Kong Country 1 is better than the sequels because it had wow factor. Riddle me this, Craig. What do you call wow factor viewed in retrospect? Nostalgia. Games should be judged based on their design, not based on your memories of how impressive something was over 20 years ago. Now, if you want to make an argument based on the actual design of the games, then I can actually respect your opinion. But Stuttering Craig is not the only one who believes DKC1 is the better game. In recent years, a vocal minority of gamers have come out in defense of this position. Some of them being fans of the series who have a simple preference, others being people who only really grew up with DKC1 and don't care as much for the sequels, and still others being newcomers who preferred DKC1 just because they played it first. Some people hold this preference respectfully, and others not so much. At the end of the day, it's just an opinion, and I'm not going to judge people over it. After all, I am the guy who likes Sonic 1 more than Sonic 2. But on the topic of DKC1 versus DKC2, I do not hesitate to cast my vote with the majority. As far as I'm concerned, not only is DKC2 the better game, but it is so by a considerable margin. Like the first game, DKC2 also saw a portable re-release 9 years after the Super Nintendo version in November 2004. Despite garnering somewhat better reception than the first remake, Donkey Kong Country 2 on GBA has been similarly repudiated as a dirty second-tier handheld abortion of an SNES classic. And once again, I must dissent. The remake of Donkey Kong Country 2 on GBA may be flawed like its predecessor, but it is so much better than it's given credit for. Thus, like all ROR installments, I'll be giving both games an in-depth comparison to see what's what. This is Donkey Kong Country 2: Remake or Rebreak. Let's begin with the plot. As with the previous game, the SNES original gives you little more than bare bones information about the story. In the first level, you can enter K. Rool's cabin, and find a note which informs you that Donkey Kong has been Kong-napped by the Kremlin crew and is being held for a ransom of the Kong banana horde. The GBA remake, like its prequel, adds some cutscenes to round out the narrative and make it more complete. We open on the shores of Donkey Kong Island, with a lovely remix of Diddy Kong Racing's theme playing in the background. After the events of the first game, DK has decided to take some time off from the video game hero business. May I say how much I love this visual of Donkey Kong sitting in a lawn chair and sipping a banana milkshake? After DK blows up Cranky in a rather amusing exchange of dialogue, a reptilian-looking airship descends from the sky, piloted by none other than the callous and cantankerous Captain K. Rool and the contemptuous Kremlin crew. Livid from his defeat in the first game, K. Rool sends his Kremlin minions down to Donkey Kong Island and abducts DK before disappearing into the clouds. Moments later, Diddy Kong and his girlfriend, a chimpanzee named Dixie Kong, arrive at the scene and discover a ransom note from the Kremlins. The captain reveals that DK's safe return will be guaranteed only if the Kongs relinquish their banana horde. While the other Kongs quarrel amongst themselves as to whether it's worth giving in to K. Rool's demands, Diddy and Dixie volunteer to infiltrate the Kremlin's pirate fortress on Crocodile Isle and rescue DK from the clutches of Captain K. Rool and the Kremlin crew. The other Kongs join the effort, and Diddy and Dixie take off for the island. Like with the previous game, Diddy's Conquest wins no awards for its storytelling. Still, I consider it to be a fun setup for a Donkey Kong game, especially in regards to Diddy's character. Taking charge as the main playable character, Diddy undergoes a sort of rite of passage on a journey of growth to rescue his role model and establish himself as a video game hero in his own right. Dixie Kong is also a great character. Not only is she adorable, but unlike a lot of female protagonists in gaming these days, she doesn't have to be gritty or one of the boys in order to kick ass and take names. I'm also a fan of the banana-shaped ponytail. I have heard some people complain that the Kong-napping plot point makes the story too generic, but I say that if Streets of Rage can do it, then so can Donkey Kong. Let's move on to dem aesthetics. Going back to my review of the first Donkey Kong Country, I stated that it was a great looking game. While I still stand by that position, I did notice during my many hours of editing the review just how much brown, gray, and white there was in the color scheme. Donkey Kong Country 2 is a bit of a different story. All of the different level types, with maybe 2 exceptions, have a fuller and more engaging color palette. Even the mine levels have a nice mix of warms and cools in the rock, with bright yellow crystals twinkling in the background. In case I'm not making myself obvious, I think Donkey Kong Country 2 is a gorgeous game. Hands down better looking than the first. Not only do the environments make good use of parallax scrolling, not only does it have a more vibrant color palette, and not only does it make use of nifty graphical effects, but the stronger rendering quality also makes it look even more realistic than DKC1 did. And that's not even mentioning the sprites, which are also better modeled and animated than those of the previous game. Once again, I really find myself enjoying the art direction. I wasn't super keen on the pirate theme at first, but it quickly became one of my favorite things about this game. It distinguishes DKC2 from its prequel and gives it an identity of its own. Even so, DKC2 still manages to be a much more varied game in terms of art design. Donkey Kong Country 1 was Jungle Island themed, and while there's nothing wrong with that, it seems almost uninspired when compared to Diddy's Conquest. While DKC1 had jungles, temples, mines, and caves, DKC2 has pirate ships, roller coaster rides, crystal mines, brambles, and swamps, in addition to the more stereotypical volcanoes, castles, and ice caves. And then there are the enemies, who as before managed to be the right combination of realistic and cartoony. Your favorite baddies from DKC1 see a reincarnation here, decked out in scarves, tricorn hats, and peg legs. Clump has become the cannonball firing cannon, headscarf wearing mini neckies now dive bomb you from above, and the hopping critters from the first game now bounce around on pogo peg legs. Pogo peg legs. Now that's using your imagination. A batch of new enemies also join the fray, and they're all distinct and memorable as well, like the hook-throwing crooks and the oversized sword-lugging cutlasses. While DKC2 has a slightly more serious tone than the first, the art direction is still oozing with charm and creativity. I can say truthfully and without a doubt that Donkey Kong Country 2 is my favorite looking game on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. So how does the GBA version compare graphically? Before jumping into this, I'd like to reiterate that the GBA's small screen size necessarily presented some limitations for developers trying to port SNES games to the GBA. Overall, I find that the GBA remake of DKC2 is in a similar similar position to the previous remake. The SNES version clearly looks better, and I won't argue to the contrary, but at the same time, DKC2 is still a spectacular looking game by GBA standards. As with the last remake, all of the special effects from the console version are recreated here, including the 3D backgrounds. Even if you disagree with me, I think we can at least compromise that Rare did a better job porting the graphics for this game than they did for DKC1. The sprites don't look quite as muddy, and the saturation seems much better. The graphics that were added to flesh out new additions also look pretty decent. Similar to its home console cousin, I consider the portable remake of DKC2 to be the best looking game on the Game Boy Advance. We still have yet to touch on the soundtrack by David Wise, and oh my Hylia, is it amazing! I could make an entire video discussing my thoughts on just the music in this game. It's that fucking good. DKC1 was a great sounding game as well, but for every AAA track like Life in the Mines or DK Island Swing, there was an okay one like Voices of the Temple or Misty Menace. DKC2, on the other hand, is a virtually flawless collection of tunes. Every single track in this game equals, if not surpasses, the best that DKC1 had to offer. The instrumentation is exceptional, the melodies are memorable and catchy, and every track has just the right splash of ambience. One of my favorites is Mining Melancholy, the track that plays during the Crystal Mine levels. Though dominated by the percussive beat of pickaxes and digging tools slamming against the rock, some piano and humming from the Zinger enemies give the track a strong emotional appeal. The genre variety is also through the roof. Hothead Bop, Snaky Shanty, and Token Tango go for a big band styling, Jib Jig has a traditional Irish flair, Disco Train has a fun dance beat, and Forest Interlude and Sticker Brush Symphony offer an orchestrated sound. And speaking of Sticker Brush Symphony, what a fantastic song that is. I don't think it's overrated in the slightest. Very few video game songs manage to pull off its unique combination of catchy and emotional, while still fitting perfectly into the game proper. What impresses me most is that while it took 3 people to compose DKC1, David Wise was able to create this 32-some track masterpiece completely on his own. Some of you may have wondered why in the last review I called him my favorite video game composer. Well, it's quite simple. He composed my favorite video game soundtrack. Well done, sir. So how does the music in the GBA version compare? Once again, I feel it's undeservedly pissed upon simply for sounding different than the SNES version. As with the DKC1 remake, I think this is one spectacular sounding GBA game. And while I'm sure that many are probably gonna want to kill me for saying this, I just might prefer it to the SNES soundtrack. It seems to me like most of the tracks saw an improvement of some kind in the transition. I prefer the GBA's rendition of Clomp's Romp, In a Snowbound Land, Bayou Boogie, Swanky Swing, Crook's March, Boss Bossa Nova, Forest Interlude, Hothead Bop, Jib Jig, the second half of Crocodile Cacophony, and yes, even Sticker Brush Symphony. Other tracks like Clubba's Revile, Mining Melancholy, Token Tango, Disco Train, Snaky Shanty, Blood of the Zinger, and Cranky's Conga also sound pretty good for a GBA game. The new tracks for the story intro, Espresso Racing, and the Funky's Flight minigame are also fabulous. The only tracks I consider to have suffered a downgrade in the transition are Haunted Chase, Run Ramby Run, Primal Rave, Schoolhouse Harmony, and the first half of Crocodile Cacophony. Like last time, I also find myself preferring the sound design in the GBA remake over the SNES original. The sound effects have better clarity, and their cartoonish flair better fits the Donkey Kong universe. I'm sure that there are plenty of people who disagree with me, but I think we can at least agree that Rare did a better job recreating DKC2's soundtrack for GBA than they did with DKC1. The overall instrument quality seems improved, and the tunes sound relatively similar to the SNES versions. At the end of the day, I love either version of the soundtrack more than words can describe. Let's get on to dat gameplay. As mentioned before, Diddy's Conquest takes place on the sinister Crocodile Isle, a pirate fortress of 7 mandatory worlds, each consisting of 4 to 6 quirkily named levels. Like the last game on SNES, you can only move between worlds after reaching a Funky's Flights for a given world. Additionally, you'll have to make it to the Kong College and speak with Wrinkly Kong in order to save the game. And as before, the location of Kong College can be early on in a world or near the end. One complaint that a lot of DKC1 fans often bring up involves the the save feature. DKC2 introduces banana coins to the franchise, which are collected in stages and spent on various services provided by the other Kongs. The first time you visit Wrinkly Kong in a world, you can save for free. Each time after that, you'll have to pay 2 banana coins per save, and a lot of people don't like that. While I understand where people are coming from and agree that it wasn't the best design choice out there, I really don't see why people make such a huge deal out of it. Is it really that hard to find 2 banana coins in a stage? Even during my very first playthrough, I always had enough to get by. Regardless, this is something that is changed for the better in the GBA version. Pressing start on the world map will open an inventory screen, where you can save the game or access one of Funky's gyrocopters at any time. So if you really hate paying to save, then just play the GBA version. In terms of game mechanics, DKC2 is largely the same as its predecessor. You're still hopping and bopping your way through side-scrolling stages, you're still bouncing off of or bowling into enemies to kill them, and you're still recovering your Kong compatriot from buddy barrels for use as a second hit point. The control is just as solid as last time, though there are 2 small but noticeable improvements. One, the Kongs will now hold in place when throwing barrels in midair. It can also throw barrels directly upwards, allowing for more stable aiming. 2, you no longer slow to a stop after completing a rolling move, which helps to keep up the pace. Regarding the GBA control, I find it to be an improvement over the previous remake. The slipperiness is gone and it approximates the SNES control well enough. Another addition that I really like is the team up move. If you happen to have both Kongs, you can jump onto each other's shoulders and throw a Kong towards collectibles and platforms. You can also use them as a projectile for defeating enemies. It's a very useful and fun mechanic, and one that I would have loved to see come back in the Return series. Like the previous games, the 2 Kongs play slightly differently. As before, Diddy is slightly faster, jumps higher, and rolls longer distances. Dixie, meanwhile, can do a helicopter spin move that allows her to make short work of tricky platforming and nab goodies that Diddy can't. A lot of DKC1 fans are keen to remind us of how awful it is that Donkey Kong himself is not playable this time around. If that's seriously preventing you from enjoying this game, then you don't know what a nitpick is. Regardless, I opine that Diddy and Dixie make for the better Kong duo. Dixie's helicopter spin makes the game's platforming more forgiving for beginners, while Diddy's more versatile moveset makes him great for more experienced players who can learn to use them properly. Bananas, balloons, banana coins, and Kong letters again abound in stages, giving players ample opportunities to score extra lives. Barrels and other projectiles return, but there's a much more interesting variety here than there was in DKC1. My favorite addition is the treasure chests, which yield goodies upon impact. In terms of level design, you'll remember that I praised DKC1 for keeping things straightforward and fast-paced, while offering a sufficient number of new stage hazards and set pieces to shake things up. While I stand by those claims, I still find that DKC2's level design is a significant improvement over that of its prequel. As before, things are straightforward, fast-paced, and linear, while also offering bonus rooms for more explorative players. But in contrast to 90% of DKC1 stages, which were mostly horizontal dashes for the exit, DKC2 throws helpings of vertical platforming into the mix for greater structural variety. In addition to the more creative and engaging cast of pirate-themed baddies, the levels offer much more interesting stage hazards and set pieces than last time around, and this is where the level design of Diddy's Conquest truly shines. Unlike DKC1, every single level in this game does something new. Barrel Blast progresses via maze-like grid of barrel cannons. Target Terror sees the player riding along on a weird-looking roller coaster jumping at plus and minus barrels to open barriers. Red Hot Ride traverses over open lava and colorful blue balloons, dodging zingers and other enemies along the way. Toxic Tower sees the player racing for the top against a rising pool of caustic green liquid. Parachute Panic uses a purple squawks to bob and weave through a horde of zingers. And speaking of squawks, animal buddies also see a return, and they greatly compound the game's variety. Rambi the Rhino and Engard the Swordfish return, and are largely unchanged from last time. Squawks the Parrot also reappears, though he is now fully playable and capable of spitting eggs as a projectile attack. New animal buddies include the high-jumping Rattly the Rattlesnake and the web-spinning Squitter the Spider. 2 more buddies, Glimmer the Anglerfish and Clapper the Seal, act as stage-specific set pieces. Not only do all of the buddies control exceptionally well, not only do they all have interesting and unique abilities, not only do they now have all new supercharge moves, moves, but this time around, certain levels have been designed with specific animal buddies in mind. Radley takes the helm for Rattle Battle, Squitter platforms about in Web Woods, Ramby runs for his life in Ramby Rumble, On Guard maneuvers through Arctic Abyss, and Squawks races for the finish in Screech's Sprint. I simply cannot express how much I love playing as the animal buddies in this game. It keeps the variety going and only bolsters an already fantastic collection of stages. And it's this variety that I think ultimately allows Diddy's Conquest to beat out Donkey Kong Country 1. The game gives you everything it's got without a dull moment to its name. The same thing goes for the boss battles, which are a huge improvement over DKC1's lackluster face-offs. Unlike DKC1, which recycled a lot of bosses, every single one of DKC2's bosses is unique and requires a different strategy to defeat. Some might peg Creepy Crow as a repeat, but the structure of the two Crow fights are more than different enough for me to be satisfied. A neat addition in the GBA version is that after defeating Crow for the first time, Creepy Crow will actually drift out of his corpse. Crinky's snarky quips at the end of every boss battle also never fail to put a smile on my face. On top of their variety, the bosses also periodically change up their attack cycles, keeping the player on their toes and maintaining the tension. Like DKC2's excellent platforming stages, the boss fights are tons of fun. And then there are the small and oft ignored touches that upgrade DKC2 from an excellent game to an amazing one. The little things that show you that the developers knew they were making something special. Each stage ends with a mini game that allows you to win extra lives and other goodies, which makes finishing a level feel special and rewarding. Both Kongs also have a charming victory animation. Diddy will bust out a boombox and drop some DK jams, while Dixie will play some neat riffs on her blue bass guitar. Depending on the stage, the victory jingle will change slightly. Each type of stage has its own rendition of the Donkey Kong Country death jingle as well. While the GBA version lacks some of these things due to cartridge limitations, it does at least give Diddy and Dixie unique death jingles. Another thing I like is how whenever you approach a boss, the Kongs will let out a frightened scream and their eyes will bug out. Another nifty quirk is that Dixie Kong doesn't pick up barrels with her hands. She uses her ponytail to lift them over her head. The game's dialogue is also extremely amusing and memorable. And on top of everything else, Donkey Kong Country 2 manages to offer a decent amount of challenge. DKC 2 is widely regarded as the hardest game in the trilogy, and naturally there have been plenty of complaints regarding the game's difficulty balancing, particularly from newcomers to the series and DKC1 fans to a lesser extent. Let me be clear that I have no problem with other people enjoying games like Battletoads, Ninja Gaiden, or Sonic the Hedgehog 2. But I'm afraid I must wholeheartedly disagree if you mean to tell me that DKC2 has the worst difficulty balancing of the bunch. Like its predecessor, Donkey Kong Country 2 understands that games should be well designed and fun to play first, and difficult to finish second. It's a reasonably challenging and rewarding experience whose difficulty stems from proper sources of real challenge. Mastery of simple to learn mechanics, straightforward but engaging level design, and a sufficiently lenient margin of error. Like all good hard games, DKC 2 starts off relatively tame to ease you into the mechanics, and gets organically harder as the game progresses. The save feature also negates the issues of a beat-in-one-sitting design philosophy. Checkpoints are also abundant and largely start you off where you'd like them to. Enemies will keep you on your toes, but will never overstay their welcome. Kong letters, bananas, and a cornucopia of balloons will keep you amply stocked with extra lives and make sure that even the least skilled players can reach the end of the game. Yes, the game is hard, and you're guaranteed to die plenty of times, but it's never unreasonably hard. So long as you're willing to keep trying, you will beat this game. On top of that, I find that the visibility problems of DKC1 and SNES have been largely corrected this time around. I can't think of a single instance where I died or was otherwise encumbered by a bad camera. The remake once again attempts to prevent screen crunch with smaller sprites, and again offers better visibility than the SNES original. With the exception of some frustrating stages in the Lost World, Donkey Kong Country 2 is very playable. And for players who have mastered the standard ROM, Donkey Kong Country 2 once again offers bonus rooms for hardcore players and completionists. And in general, I find that the bonus room system is majorly improved over DKC1. The big problem there was that the game really didn't reward you for going after them, beyond bragging rights. In DKC2, bonus rooms become short minigames you play to score Creme coins, doubloons with K. Rool's face on them. You'll either have to beat a certain number of enemies, collect a certain number of stars, or simply make it to the end. Each bonus bonus room is unique and offers a short burst of high-octane fun. The locations of the bonus rooms themselves are also much less cryptic than they were last time, and you can always pay Cranky for useful hints if you don't know where to go. Upon collecting 15 Krem coins, you'll be able to visit Clubba's kiosk and enter the secret 8th world of the game, the Kremling Lost World. There are 5 optional levels here. They're easily the hardest in the game. Lots of people hate Animal Antics, where you marathon a level as all 5 animal buddies, but even the infamous Squawk section isn't that bad if you just take it slow and steady. The GBA version is also nice enough to move the Star Barrel to the beginning of the Squawk section. Clobber Carnage and Fiery Furnace, on the other hand, can both go fuck themselves. I love this game to death, but some really obnoxious enemy placement and annoying barrel cannon sections prevent me from enjoying either stage. And though the GBA version does improve Animal Antics, it also makes Fiery Furnace worse by speeding up the zingers in the bonus room for no fucking reason. Completing the Lost World unlocks the true final boss and ending of the game. So not only are bonus rooms themselves more fun to play, but playing them rewards you with exclusive content. In case that hasn't already got completionists salivating, each level also contains a hidden DK coin to increase Diddy's status as a video game hero. In case all of that isn't enough to satisfy you, the GBA version has even more side quests. Like the previous remake, DKC2 on GBA introduces a status screen to better keep track of how many bonus rooms and golden feathers you found in the stage. Additionally, the scrapbook mechanic also returns. This time, it's a lot more obvious which enemies you have to kill to get what photo. You can also visit Wrinkly to pay for hints on photo locations, and if you fill up a page, he'll give you a DK coin. So once again, you'll have to complete the scrapbook if you want to 102% the remake. Swanky Kong's bonus bonanza returns, and as before, you can play a super fun trivia game to earn some extra lives. The GBA version also sports a cameo from Candy Kong. Funky's Flights now offers a series of flying minigames where you take control of a gyrocopter and accomplish an objective for DK coins. While the first mission is meh, and the second and third missions suck hairy gorilla balls, the rest of them aren't half bad and contain some interesting level design. Cranky Kong's Monkey Museum now sports an espresso racing minigame where you take control of the Eponymous Ostrich and race against other birds for trophies. Getting first place will earn you a DK coin, but that's easier said than done. In order to prep espresso for a successful race, you'll have to track down the golden feathers located in each level. You can use them to upgrade espresso along 4 stats, but let me tell you folks, none of them really mean jack shit besides speed. All that Boost and Fly do is allow you to carry more power-ups from the track, and your competition will always snatch them up before you can even get close to them. Strength doesn't seem to do anything at all. Even with a well-upgraded espresso, these races often feel like luck-based crapshoots. There's nothing wrong with making them hard, but it seems like if you can't get in the lead at the very beginning, you're gonna lose. While espresso racing was a fun idea, the execution leaves a lot to be desired. Believe it or not, Clubba has a minigame too, but you don't get anything for playing it, and it really isn't anything special. Overall, both versions of DKC2 offer plenty of meat for completionist types and are much more rewarding than DKC1, with the GBA version adding even more fun extras. Like with DKC1, I find that 102%ing Donkey Kong Country 2 is a really fun and enjoyable experience. With that, I think it's time we jumped into the spoiler section.
Ah, spoiler alert!
After finishing off Creepy Crow and Gloomy Gulch, the Kongs arrive at K. Rool's Keep, where DK is supposedly being locked up. After making their way through some of the toughest levels in the game, the Kongs reach the top of the fortress and steady themselves for a face-off against the captain. You dirty motherfucker! I do have to say, there is a strange satisfaction knowing that after coming all this way up the island, that K. Rool is actually frightened enough to run away like a coward. Things are a little different in the GBA version. Instead of the cutscene we just saw, the Kongs will be ambushed by an all-new boss, the giant Kremling Kerosene. The first section with the cleavers always felt tacked on to me, but the rest of the battle fits right in with DKC2's already exceptional collection of boss battles. After racing K. Rool's parrot to the finish in Screech's sprint, the Kongs board his airship, the Flying Croc, which I'm almost certain is a reference to the Gargantua from Battletoads. Damn, K. Rool's not fucking around. DKC 2's boss fights are all excellent, and the final showdown with Captain K. Rool is no exception. This time around, he'll go after you with a cannonball shooting blunderbuss, which is also capable of spurting out flames and popping off magic blasts. Unlike the first game's final boss, Captain K. Rool offers a much more dynamic fight that will keep you guessing and fully engaged until the very end. If I had to nitpick, the fight does overstay its welcome by about 30 seconds, and it's a lot to have to redo if you die towards the end. Luckily, the game is at least nice enough to throw you some buddy barrels after every few hits or so. In general, this is a fun and reasonably challenging final boss that does a good job capping off the game's difficulty curve. After exploding K. Rool's blunderbuss for a 9th time, Donkey Kong will free himself from his binds and Falcon punch K. Rool through the roof, who is then mobbed by a pack of sharks. Now that's satisfying. The GBA remake also had the short cutscene of the Kongs escaping the flying croc and returning to DK Island. Like last time, the game's cast of baddies and buddies will arrive at Clubba's kiosk for a roll call, with the GBA version adding swanky new animations and backdrops. But the game's not over yet. In the GBA version, Captain K. Rool will crash land in the depths of the Kremling Lost World and dare the Kongs to face him for a second time. After making their way through the Lost World, the Kongs arrive at Crocodile Core and square off with the Kremling commander once again. After dodging a barrage of cannonballs, the Kongs backfire the blunderbuss a final time and send K. Rool reeling into the core of Crocodile Isle. What follows is one of my all-time favorite video game endings. The Kongs staring into the horizon, the rolling waves, the exploding island, K. Rool riding off into the sunset and laughing all the way. It's brilliant. In the GBA version, Funky Kong will also bomb K. Rool's raft. While that's nice and all, I strongly prefer the more melancholy presentation of the SNES original. With that, Diddy's Conquest comes to an end. So, Remake or Rebreak. What's the verdict? Like with the previous port, I opine that the GBA version of Donkey Kong Country 2 deserves a remake score. DKC 2 on GBA is a strong recreation of the original, which, despite its flaws, fixes some of the problems of the original and adds new content. The pay-to-save and world travel issues have been corrected with a new inventory screen, which also houses hints for bonus rooms and scrapbook photos, along with the status screen. Yes, the graphics are slightly downgraded and the music sounds different, but both still remain impressive by the standards of the Game Boy Advance, and I find that the sound design is improved as well. While the mini-games aren't as good as DKC 1's, they're still generally fun and worthwhile additions to an already amazing game. The scrapbook mechanic is also as great as it was last time. Even if you disagree and consider the game a remat, I think we can at least compromise that Rare did a better job porting this game than they did with DKC 1. The graphics look nicer, the music sounds more refined, and the control issues have been ironed out. Unlike the last game where some personal quibbles led me to prefer the SNES original over the GBA remake, I couldn't tell you which version of DKC 2 is my favorite. They're both great games and I love them equally. As for Diddy's Conquest as a game on its own, can you guys see why I prefer it over Donkey Kong Country? The only way I could possibly see the first game as better than the second is if I owned a tight-fitting pair of rose-tinted DKC 1 nostalgia goggles. The graphics are more colorful, more detailed, better modeled, and better animated. The soundtrack is the best I've heard in a video game. The controls are more refined, and the player characters are more balanced. The level design is significantly improved over the first in a variety of aspects. The boss battles are much more varied and interesting to play. The bonus room system is more rewarding, and the DK coins, golden feathers, and scrapbook photos offer exploration to supplement the linear and straightforward level design. Top all of that off with a charming pirate theme and a host of small but endearing design choices, and you got what I consider the best classic side-scrolling game ever made. Seriously, why can't this game be considered as good as Super Mario World or Sonic 3 and Knuckles? As well designed as those games are, they aren't anywhere near as quirky, unique, challenging, or memorable as this game is. Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Conquest is one of my absolute most favorite games of all time, perhaps second only to a certain 3D Mario game, and I love it to death. And if you haven't played it for whatever reason, then what the hell are you doing watching this review? Go download the SNES original off the Wii U Virtual Console for $8, or go buy the excellent GBA remake online for $12. I don't care which version, just do yourself a favor and try this masterpiece for yourself. Even if you didn't care for the first game, I think the sequel's many improvements will be enough for you to have at least a decent time. I love this game to death, and I think you will too, so long as you're interested enough to the challenge. With 2 best-selling games under their belt and a legacy of critical acclaim, Rare and Nintendo's Donkey Kong Country series was clearly a success, so it wasn't too surprising that the series received a 3rd game in November of 1996. From what I understand, this game was developed by a different team than the one behind DKC 1 and 2, who were now working on what would eventually become Banjo-Kazooie. While Donkey Kong Country 3 still did fairly impressive in terms of sales, its degree of financial success was no doubt affected by the release of the Nintendo 64 that same year. While DKC 3 was well received, many critics and fans didn't seem to enjoy it as much as the previous games. Donkey Kong Country 3 is definitely the most divisive game in the original trilogy. Some people, many of whom have commented on my previous reviews, argue that the game is the best in the original trilogy. Others, with equal conviction, argue that the game is the worst in the original trilogy. Still more people rate the game decisively in between the first and second. So where do I stand? Let's find out. As with Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble also saw a portable reincarnation 9-some years after the original on the Game Boy Advance. As with the previous remakes, reception has been mostly in favor of the SNES original, though this time around there is a crowd who prefers the remake for reasons I'll bring up in this review. As always, we'll be giving the SNES and GBA versions an in-depth comparison to see how good of a game DKC 3 is on its own, and how well the remake recreates, builds upon, and fixes the problems of the original. This is Donkey Kong Country 3 Remake or Rebreak. Let's begin with the plot. Unlike the previous 2 games on SNES, which at least offered quasi-cutscenes to give you an inkling of the plot, DKC 3 can't be arsed. The game just starts. Sure, you'll meet Wrinkly Kong and Funky Kong within seconds of booting a save file, but they don't give you any sort of exposition at all. But EXO, surely the GBA version introduces an introductory cutscene to provide some background information. Nope. The GBA version is no different from the original at all, besides refitting Wrinkly's save cave into the banana bird worshipping Wrinkly's refuge. And that's really disappointing, because out of all the games in the original trilogy, DKC 3 needed an introductory cutscene the most. We're going old school today, folks, we're looking at the manual. After defeating Captain K. Rool and sinking Crocodile Isle to the bottom of the ocean, the Kongs return to DK Island for some much needed R&R. One day, DK and Diddy decide to take a day trip to some nearby islands, a Canada-like archipelago known as the Northern Hemisphere, leaving Dixie behind to man the fort. But after 2 restless nights without the return of her friends, Dixie begins to suspect that her fellow Kongs have run into some trouble. Concerned, Dixie sets off to the Northern Hemisphere and encounters Wrinkly Kong, who has retired from Kong College to enjoy her final years in paradise. She informs Dixie that DK and Diddy did pass by, but this was a while ago. Wrinkly convinces Dixie Kong to pay Funky a visit, and also requests that she keeps her eyes peeled for the legendary banana birds, creepy looking motherfuckers with shit your pants scary eyes. Dixie approaches Funky for help, but he's unfortunately clueless as to the boy's whereabouts. Regardless, he offers his boat rental services as a means of navigating the Northern Hemisphere, and convinces Dixie to team up with her muscle-bound infant cousin, the southern lowland gorilla Kitty Kong. Thus, Dixie and Kitty set off for the islands on board one of Funky's boats, blissfully unaware that the new Kremlin commander, the mysterious Chaos, has invaded the islands with his choleric company of Kremlin commandos. So do you see why an intro cutscene might have been kind of helpful? Dixie Kong's Double Trouble is by no means a story-driven game, but it would still be nice to know what the hell is going on without having to hunt down a manual online, you know? As for the story itself, I'm glad that my favorite Donkey Kong character gets a shot at the spotlight in her own game, but something about DKC 3's plot has never gelled with me. I don't know quite what. Regardless, DKC 3 isn't attempting to be story-driven to begin with, and the other 2 games weren't masterpieces of storytelling either, so I think I can overlook that. A lot of people seem to really hate Kitty Kong, the second player character in this game, and I can't say I understand why. Sure, his character design is pretty goofy and he's not as memorable as the other 3 Kongs, but I don't understand what he's done to become the Jar Jar Binks of the franchise. Let's get into dem aesthetics. In terms of art direction, the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy is probably the only one I know to give each game a distinct look and feel. The first game was Jungle Island themed and contained appropriate level themes to match. The second game was pirate themed and contained a huge variety of adventurous level themes and pirate flavored enemies. The third game is equally as distinct, though I couldn't tell you what theme they were going for here. If I had to guess, it seems to be a hodgepodge of an ocean theme, a classic horror theme, and a mad scientist theme. It's certainly not as focused or identifiable as the first 2 installments. On top of that, many of the enemies and level themes are recycled from the first 2 games. While the game certainly puts its own spin on things, enough to keep things from feeling uninspired or derivative, I can't help but find DKC 3 a smidge tired and confused in the art direction department. Concerning the actual graphics themselves, they're really well done. As before, the game treads a fine line between realistic and cartoony, with goofy and over the top as well as greatly detailed modeled and rendered sprites and backgrounds. The game is bright and colorful, and the dock levels also make use of a gorgeous 3D water effect. While the environments may be largely recycled from DKC1, they look more than different enough and are all good on the eyes. Visually, I'd say that DKC3 on SNES is largely on par with its predecessors. So how does the GBA version compare? Well, remember how in the previous review I called DKC2 on GBA the best looking game on the system? Well, I think I kinda jumped the gun, because DKC3 on GBA clearly looks better. While I prefer the second game's art direction for sure, DKC3 on GBA looks best overall. As before, the sprites and backgrounds have been shrunk to accommodate the GBA's smaller screen size, but the colors and detail seem fully preserved. It seems to have suffered no downgrade in graphical quality from the SNES version. They look almost indistinguishable. It kinda makes me wonder why the first two games couldn't have been the same way, but I still opine that those games look good by GBA standards. DKC3 on GBA looks just about as good as it did on SNES. How about the soundtrack? The general consensus seems to be that DKC3's soundtrack isn't quite as good as the first and second games, though it certainly has its fans. David Wise returns to the composer's chair from last time round, rejoined by Evelyn Novakovic of DKC1 fame. From what I understand, Evelyn Novakovic composed all the level themes and the boss themes, while David Wise composed everything else. The result is a soundtrack that sounds much more moody and atmospheric than the previous two, kinda like Novakovic's Voices of the Temple track from DKC1. So what do I think of it? While I do opine that it's underrated, I'd be lying if I said it was my favorite of the trilogy. There's a number of really good songs in here, like Nuts and Bolts, Rockface Rumble, and Big Boss Blues. But beyond a good 8 or so tracks, everything else is kind of forgettable. I also find that many of the songs are too low pitched and have too much bass. Some songs, like Pokey Pipe, seem to be almost exclusively bass. This depressing, atmospheric, and moody tone would be great for a Metroid game, but I think that a game where you play as a pair of apes bashing crocodiles and collecting bananas could use something a little more catchy and upbeat, don't you? I want to make it clear that I have nothing at all against Evelyn Novakovic. She's a fine composer and a great sound designer. I just don't think her style fits the Donkey Kong universe as well as Wise's more balanced approach, and I opine that DKC3 on SNES is ultimately worse off for it. A good soundtrack, certainly, but far from the best. So how about the GBA version? While the first two remakes are often criticized for butchering the SNES soundtracks, the remake of DKC3 is often criticized for not including the original soundtrack. From what I understand, the GBA speaker hardware can't handle low pitches very well. It'll actually burst into flames. And seeing as DKC3's soundtrack on SNES is almost exclusively low pitched, Rare commissioned David Wise to compose an all new soundtrack for the remake instead. And though I may be in the minority on this one, I think it's significantly better than the SNES soundtrack. Hell, it's almost as good as DKC2's. For the most part, it's a remix of Donkey Kong Country 1 soundtrack, but these aren't your average remixes. These tracks sound so distinct from the originals that they could easily pass as their own original tunes. If you listen really carefully to the country-inspired Rockface Rumble, for example, you'll just be able to make out Credit's concerto. As with DKC2, the GBA soundtrack is 100% AAA without so much as a mad track to its name. Whether it be Cascade Caper, Stilt Village, Jingle Bells, or the illustrious Waterworld, it's all catchy, it's all atmospheric, and it's all memorable. The instrument quality is also phenomenal, and as with the previous two remakes, the sound design has once again seen a noticeable improvement in my opinion. It's cartoony and over the top, just like a Donkey Kong game should be. I do have two minor complaints regarding the remake's sound. One, the game doesn't have a dedicated final boss theme. Two, the Donkey Kong Country death jingle is completely missing. May I ask why? Was there seriously not enough room on the cartridge to fit a 5-second death jingle? But frankly, these are pretty minor in the grand scheme of things. In terms of sound, I consider DKC3 GBA to be an improvement over the SNES original. And with that, it's time we got on to DEC gameplay. Dixie's journey through the Northern Hemisphere will take her through 8 worlds of about 4 or 5 levels, which once again sport their own unique and quirky names. Along the way, Dixie and Kitty will have to hop and bop their way through Kremlings and other baddies while throwing barrels and collecting the usual bananas, balloons, and Kong letters. The world map system has seen a revamp that addresses the potential travel and save issues from the previous two games. Unlike DKC 1 and 2, where you had to reach a specific point in the world to be able to save the game or travel to another world, DKC 3 allows you to leave a world at any time simply by walking getting out of it, and a wrinkly save cave location is available next to Funky's shop from the beginning of the game for you to save at any time. So if you didn't care for the save system in the previous two games, then your prayers have been answered. Nevertheless, the GBA version does allow you to save the game from the menu, and while that's by no means a major improvement, the extra convenience is nice. DKC3 also sees some differences in terms of progression. You travel around the northern Cremisphere in search of DK and Kitty, and defeating bosses will sometimes reward you with spare parts that Funky can use to make new boats at his shop. Using these new boats will allow you to access parts of the world map that you couldn't before and unlock new areas. In some instances, especially in the GBA version, you're actually allowed to choose between 2 or 3 worlds at a time and complete them in whatever order you wish. These are some interesting touches that make DKC3 stand out, but I honestly never minded the more linear approach of past and future games. Regarding mechanics, the control is just as smooth and fun to play as before, and Dixie's helicopter spin continues to balance out the platforming for DKC noobs. In terms of control and mechanics, Kiddy Kong is largely the same as Donkey Kong from the first game, barring the hand slap mechanic. Unlike DK, however, Kiddy Kong can skip across water like a stone, which is needed to reach certain collectibles in the game. Besides that, however, it's pretty situational and doesn't even control very well. The team-up mechanic returns from the second game, but it's a little different depending on which character initiates it. When Kiddy throws Dixie, the move is largely the same as in DKC2. If Dixie throws Kiddy, he can be used to break open secret passages. Like the water skip move, it's only really useful for finding a handful of secrets, but it at least controls better. As with the second game, Donkey Kong is once again not playable, and neither is his nephew Diddy. While many people seem to think that that's a huge drawback that totally ruins the game, I think it's just as much a nitpick here as it was in DKC2. Kiddy may not be as much fun to play as the previous Kongs, but he's far from a deal breaker. Also returning our animal buddies, who you can once again ride after finding in crates or transform into via a change barrel. Squawks, Squitter, and Ungard return from the previous game, controlling and playing exactly as they did before, but Rambi and Readily are nowhere to be seen. In their place is Ellie the Elephant, who is one of the highlights of DKC3. She can use her trunk to grab barrels from a distance and to suck up water for use as a projectile attack, which makes for interesting level design. A purple Squawks also makes an appearance, and while he can't spit projectiles at enemies, he can pick up and throw barrels. Honestly, I don't find playing as the animal buddies to be as much fun as before. Animal buddies were one of the best parts of DKC2. They were so much fun to play as, they controlled like a dream, and their levels perfectly complemented their abilities. The animal buddies certainly got their share of levels in DKC3, and I do find that they were overall used better than in DKC1, but most of the animal buddy-centric levels seem to focus on Ellie, to the detriment of other great buddies like Squawks and Squitter. And for every great animal buddy level like Crackshot Croc or Bobbing Barrel Brawl, you get something like Floodlit Fish, which is just dull, or Stampede Sprint, which is the worst fucking level in a Donkey Kong game. What's here works, and there is plenty of enjoyment to be had, but I still think that the animal buddies are a step backward from Diddy's Conquest. The boss battles, in contrast, are all pretty solid. Each one of them sports unique character design and strategy to defeat. Hell, I'm almost tempted to call them better than DKC2's boss fights. In the battle against the overgrown Belcher the Barrel, you have to throw knickknacks into the boss's mouth to send it backwards into a pit. In the fight against Bleak the Snowman, you engage in a snowball fight to the death. The GBA version also sports an all-new boss battle against Croctopus, which is alright. Kerosene was a lot more interesting in my opinion. As with DKC2, the bosses will change up their attack cycles as you progress through the fight, keeping things interesting and engaging. The boss battles are all excellent and one of the highlights of Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. Unfortunately, this is where the positives start to recede. Let's talk level design. In general, levels are largely structured as they were in previous games. You got a main linear pathway with the occasional branching pathways that brandish extra lives, DK coins, or bonus rooms. If you're like me and prefer more streamlined levels than what classic Sonic brings to the table, you'll be glad to know that DKC3 keeps things as simple and straightforward as before. DKC3 also contains its fair share of vertical platforming levels to spice things up. One of the things that made DKC2 such a great experience for me was its sheer variety. Every level did something new, and it made the game's levels more interesting and memorable for it. DKC3 attempts to follow this design philosophy, and it's a pretty committed attempt. Whether you're dodging projectiles from trigger-happy carbines, or killing sneaks on wheels to open doors, or even faking out a lightning storm, DKC3 certainly tries its damnedest to deliver some engaging and original level design, and for the first 4 worlds or so, it largely succeeds. But the moment you reach K3 Razor Ridge and the GBA exclusive Pacifica, the game suffers a noticeable drop in quality. To be clear, the third tier levels aren't all bad. It's more like half and half. Some of them are actually really fun, while others range from uninteresting to frustrating to just annoying. Where do I begin? First of all, any level featuring this toboggan thing is an automatic fail. It's like the minecart and roller coaster levels from the first two games, only much worse. The camera is garbage, enemies fly on screen too fast, the toboggan moves too fast, the bonus rooms are annoying to get into and failing them requires you to kill yourself to try again, and in general they're just not that fun or interesting to play. And then there's Confused Cliffs. God, I hate this level. You spend the entire level climbing up this rope that's lit on fire and chasing you up an auto-scroll section. Naturally, the fire is forcing you up to the top of the screen, but a barrage of buzzes and copters will constantly be ambushing you from the top of the screen and forcing you down toward the fire. Between the awful camera and the claustrophobic level design, I always have a real bitch of a time at this stage. As you've no doubt noticed by now, I'm not a huge fan of the camera in this game. Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2 had a handful of instances where it was annoying, but in Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, it's a consistent problem. In the first 4 worlds of the game, it's mostly fine and I don't mind it, but once you reach the 3rd tier, it seems to get in the way all the time. Ropey Rumpus is a good example of what I mean. You have to climb along these rope sections, which are infested with buzzes that constantly ambush you from off screen. I know there are people who can't stand the camera in any of these games, but I think we can all agree that DKC3 is the biggest offender of the bunch. So you might be wondering, does the GBA remake improve upon any of these issues? Well, yes and no. Because of the smaller sprites and the wider aspect ratio, I feel that the GBA version is a smoother experience when it comes to seeing what's to your left and right. It makes playing levels like Tearaway Toboggan and Ropey Rumpus much more enjoyable. As far as seeing what's above or below you, however, it's just as terrible. In fact, Floodlit Fish actually got worse. I can't help on guard dodge all these lurchins in this super dark level full of downward shafts if I can't see them, game. Pan the goddamn camera! One of the highlights often brought up by those who preferred the GBA remake is the inclusion of an all-new world, Pacifica, in the upper left corner of the Northern Hemisphere. Inside are 6 brand new levels complete with new bonus rooms. And if the goal was to make levels that were just as mixed in quality as the original 3rd tier, then the level designers did a perfect job. I'm sorry folks, I want to love Pacifica. I really do. But aside from some interesting ideas and 3 good levels, the other 3 levels are some of the most insufferable in this entire game. Sunken Spruce has claustrophobic level design and terrible enemy placement, Surf's Up is another god-awful toboggan level, and Rip Curl Reef commits the cardinal sin of using a wind gimmick underwater. Seriously, this level is so much more annoying than Squawks' section in Animal Antics could ever be. I sincerely want to join the crowd that says that the inclusion of Pacifica is a solid plus for the GBA version, and while I do think that it certainly is a plus for the 3 good levels we did get, the other 3 terrible levels balance it out in the other direction. So why am I spending so much time talking about the level design in the 3rd tier? Because I don't think anybody else has ever really called attention to it. The first 4 worlds are pretty damn fun, and I actually think that the final required world in the game, Chaos Core, is pretty enjoyable as well. But then you get to K3, Razor Ridge, and Pacifica, and the game goes from solid fun to something more mixed in quality. A handful of levels does not a bad game make, but it's still a chunk of the game I dread revisiting. Even despite that handful of bad levels in the 3rd tier, I still think DKC3 is a solid and fun experience throughout if you're just looking to beat the game and not complete it. It's only if you choose to go for dem bonus rooms that the game transitions from mostly fun to kind of frustrating. Like with the previous game, DKC3 features 2 or 3 bonus rooms in every level. Entering one will take you to a minigame which rewards you with a golden bonus coin upon completion. Sometimes you're bashing baddies, other times you're collecting stars, occasionally you'll collect randomly appearing green bananas, and every other time you're simply trying to make it to the end. As with Diddy's Conquest, collecting all the bonus coins rewards you with access to new stages, a secret final boss fight, and the game's true ending. In general, I enjoy the inclusion of bonus rooms in DKC3 conceptually for the same reason as I did in the previous games. While the game's overall level design remains straightforward and linear throughout, the bonus rooms give you an incentive to go off the beaten path and explore every nook and cranny. And as far as the placement and level design surrounding the rooms themselves is concerned, I think Dixie Kong's Double Trouble is just as solid as its predecessor. Finding bonus rooms is generally rewarding, and their locations aren't as cryptic as DKC1 could often be. My main gripes concern the actual bonus room minigames themselves. To reiterate, I consider 102%ing DKC2 to be my preferred means of replaying that game. Finding bonus rooms was fun, and playing them was fun because they were simple and didn't interrupt the pace of the game. In Donkey Kong Country 3, it seems rare to decide to step up the difficulty of the rooms from the previous game, and I think the game is ultimately worse off for it. It seems like when compared to DKC2's bonus rooms, DKC3 sports more enemies, more stage hazards, more bottomless pits, stricter time limits, and other design choices that make it much harder to beat a bonus room on your first try and keep the flow flow going. To be clear, my issue is not necessarily that the rooms themselves are hard, and I can live with retrying a handful of bonus rooms because I'm not that picky. My problem is that it seems like almost every bonus room takes a few tries to complete, which absolutely kills the pace of what is otherwise a fast-moving and fun platforming game. Seriously, these things add a good extra 4 hours of playtime if you're not well practiced with them. I especially hate these green banana ones. It usually means jumping around an area with a bunch of instant fail hazards under a strict time limit, and the bonus room minigames only seem to get worse as the game enters the third tier. Not only do you have to slog through the most annoying levels in the game, but you have to do it while constantly retrying bonus rooms. And that's just bonus rooms. You have to do much more if you want to fully 103% this title, returning from Diddy's Conquest or DK Hero coins, and you're required to collect them all to fully complete the game. This time around, DK coins are under the guard of Kremlings called coins with a K. They're heavily armored in front and on top, so you'll have to ricochet a steel barrel off of a wall and hit them in the back to kill them. In general, I don't mind the introduction of coin enemies, and collecting DK coins is still a fun side quest. 90% of the time, solving the steel barrel puzzle and collecting the coin is a snap, but the 10% of the time it's not, it just becomes yet another pace breaker. That being said, fuck the coins and creepy caverns and crevice creepers. Seriously, what am I supposed to do here? On top of everything else, DKC3 sees the player going after the banana birds. There are 15 in the SNES version, and they are required to see the true ending of the game. Banana birds are collected in one of two ways. The first of these two is the Crystal Grottos, where you can play a game of Simon with 4 shining gems to release a banana bird from a crystal prison. And I can't be the only one who feels like these are a waste of time. The first few are short and relatively harmless, but as the game goes on, they get so long to the point where they just become an annoying chore. Does the game seriously expect me to memorize all of this? As the great philosopher Frank Langella once said in the hit 2012 indie movie Robot and Frank, fuck this shit. The second way of collecting banana birds is much more interesting. Living with Wrinkly and Funky in the Northern Cremisphere are a collection of shopkeepers and proprietors known as the Brothers Bear. Each one has their own unique design and personality, as well as some entertaining dialogue. By completing side quests with the brothers, you'll earn banana birds or gain access to crystal grottos you couldn't reach otherwise. While fetch quests feel kind of out of place in a Donkey Kong game, I actually find these kind of charming and fun. They're nothing amazing, but still enjoyable nonetheless. If you're playing the GBA version, then the Brothers Bear get a more realistic redesign for some reason. The remake also sports 5 new banana birds, along with the addition of Bachelor Bear. So how do you get these new banana birds? Well, keeping in line with the tradition established by the previous 2 remakes, DKC3 GBA introduces all new minigames, and they all kinda suck. Similar to the remake of DKC2, Funky Kong will give the player a series of 4 missions for a banana bird, in which the Kongs will take control of various watercraft and take on Kremlings, while the remix of RC Pro-Am's theme plays in the background. And for some reason that I don't understand, the first mission is by far the hardest. This is due to a myriad of problems. For one thing, the boat doesn't control anything like it does in the overworld, which is guaranteed to throw you off, and the camera is zoomed in too close to the boat, which leads you to crash into shit by accident. Mix all of that with an unnecessarily strict time limit, and you're in for a real bitch of a time. The second mission is much easier and kind of fun. The third mission is also a lot more forgiving, but pretty uninteresting honestly. And the fourth mission is just annoying. Overall, I can't say I enjoy the Funky Boat minigame. All of the Wrinkly save locations have been replaced with dojos where you can train with Cranky Kong for a banana bird and extra goodies. All it really amounts to is moving the shield to deflect a bunch of mini bristles and protect Cranky. It's actually kind of fun, but unlike the Funky minigame, you only have to beat a single challenge to receive the banana bird, so it just feels like a wasted opportunity. Swanky Kong also makes an appearance in this game. In the SNES original, he opened a carnival minigame where you could compete with Cranky Kong for goodies. In the GBA remake, Swanky's Sideshow is replaced with a virtual reality minigame called Swanky's Dash. You take control of Dixie Kong in what are essentially Sonic 2 special stages. You walk down this corridor and collect stars while avoiding these ball spikes. All 7 worlds feature their own VR course, but you only have to clear a certain score cap in one of them to get the banana bird. And honestly, that's probably for the best. The control feels a little slippery, Dixie moves too fast, and this break move doesn't seem to do a damn thing. Regardless, this minigame is certainly tons more playable than the Funky Boat sequences, and it's possible to clear a score cap without too much frustration, so I'll say that Swanky's Dash passes. If you've seen my reviews of the previous 2 remakes, you might be wondering if this game contains the scrapbook mechanic from the previous remakes. Well, No. And that surprises me, seeing as the ending of the SNES original even features a scrapbook in it, so it's not like they didn't have the assets for it. And speaking of the SNES credits sequence, it's completely missing in this remake. And while we're talking about things that are strangely absent, what happened to the status screen from the previous remakes? The flags on the overworld are still good enough, but if Rare can include a status screen in the other remakes, then why couldn't they do that here? This game feels like it was rushed to meet a deadline or something. What we got is certainly polished and complete, but I feel like the other remakes got a fuller treatment. Regardless, that covers my thoughts on the gameplay, so let's move on to the spoiler section.
Ah, spoiler alert!
Upon reaching the end of Mechanos, the Kongs encounter the Kremlin commander, a sinister automaton known as Chaos. After suffering a defeat at the hands of the Kongs, Chaos reluctantly exits, promising to defeat the Kongs should they ever get in his way again. After playing through the third tier and entering the Kremlin headquarters in Chaos Core, Dixie and Kitty reach Chaos's castle fortress for the final battle. After booping Chaos twice in the noggin, the machine shuts off rather anticlimactically and gets winched up to the ceiling. Chaos's defeat prompts an enraged Baron K. Rulenstein to reveal himself as the mastermind behind the events of the game. Chaos was supposedly part of some scheme for world domination, which Dixie and Kitty spoiled a la an episode of Scooby-Doo. With his robot destroyed, K. Rool decides to take matters into his own hands and defeat the Kongs on his own. And honestly, I think this is the best final boss battle in the original trilogy. The background is dark and tense, especially with the lightning striking in the background, and Big Boss Blues is a badass final boss theme. The fight itself is pretty unique as well. K. Rool will activate a series of traps that the Kongs will have to avoid while occasionally getting their hands on barrels that they can use to damage K. Rool's jetpack. It's interesting and genuinely challenging, and a perfect capstone to the trilogy. After Dixie and Kitty send K. Rool reeling, DK and Diddy tumble out of the destroyed Chaos. Yes, that's right folks, Chaos was a brainwashed Donkey and Diddy the whole time. After DK and Diddy congratulate the other Kongs for a job well done, the credits roll and the enemies appear for a traditional roll call. All's well that ends well. Or does it? If you're going for 103%, you'll still have to complete the Lost World, a volcano island known as Krematoa. A bear known as Boomer makes his home here, and for every 18 or so bonus coins, he'll use his explosive prowess to open the way to one of Krematoa's 5 levels. I've made it pretty clear that getting all the bonus rooms in this game is kind of a chore and destroys the pace of the game. So is it worth it? Well, no, because these levels aren't all that great. I mentioned earlier that Stampede Sprint, which is how Krematoa chooses to make its first impression, is the worst fucking level in a Donkey Kong game. You play as Ellie, who has been scared shitless by a pair of sneaks and won't stop running full speed ahead like a fucking train. A toxic combination of a god-awful camera, deplorable enemy placement, and Ellie's unnecessarily high speed pretty much means you're gonna waste a good 30 lives before you complete the stage. Oh, and let's not forget that Rare decided to put bonus rooms in the Lost World for some reason, and one of them requires you to bring Perry the Parakeet to the end of the stage while dodging buzzes that will kill him instantly. If you lose, which is pretty easy to do, you have to replay the entire stage with Perry in order to try again. What the hell were they thinking? And the rest of Krematoa isn't much better. Besides Crisscross Cliffs, which is probably the least offensive of the bunch, all the other levels range from annoying to tedious to just plain aggravating. In all honesty, none of these levels besides Stampede Sprint are terrible. They're decent enough stages, if not mildly annoying. But after spending hours upon hours slogging through bonus rooms in the third tier, along with the worst level in the game, my patience and temper have worn thin and it becomes hard to enjoy these levels as a result. But hey, maybe that's just my experience. Luckily, the secret final boss is actually pretty damn good. After completing a level in Krematoa, you'll score a golden cog that fits on a device back at Boomer's shop. If you collect all 5 and fit them onto the machine, it'll activate and cause Krematoa to emerge from dormancy. The lava will cause K. Rool's secret submarine, the Nautilus, to emerge from the pool in the middle of the volcano. Dixie and Kitty enter, do battle with the Baron once again. And it's a pretty damn good boss fight if I do say so myself. The background looks amazing, and the fight is just as creative and interesting as the other K. Rool duel. Defeating him in the SNES version will score you the last DK coin in the game. After collecting all the DK coins, you can return to Funky's rentals and unlock the final vehicle in the game, the Funky Copter. This will allow you to fly over the world map and reach the game's final crystal grottos, which just feel tacked on at this point in the game. Would the game like it if I got it some coffee and walked its dog as well? Flying into the clouds in the upper corner will take you to the Mama Bird, the queen of the banana birds. She informs you that Baron K. Rulenstein has inflicted a terrible curse on her and her children, trapping her behind a barrier locked by the crystal key. She promises to help the Kongs get rid of K. Rool if she can locate all of her children and break the curse. The Kongs do just that and free Mama Bird from her prison. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the ending of the original trilogy. Yes, what you just saw is your reward for slogging through all the bonus rooms, and Krematoa, and finding all the banana birds. It's cute, I'll give it that, but it's kind of disappointing compared to DKC2's ending, isn't it? For whatever reason, folks, I bothered to 103% both the SNES and GBA versions of this game. I've now done it at least 4 times, and I've gotta say, it's really not worth it. It kills the pace of the game, and all the rewards besides the secret final boss range from frustrating to disappointing. So, Remake or Rebreak. What's the verdict? Out of all the DKC remakes I've reviewed so far, DKC3 GBA definitely has me the most torn. In terms of graphics, control, and simply recreating the experience for a handheld, it's pretty damn solid. The new soundtrack is also a gigantic plus in my book. While Pacifica is a mixed bag for me overall, I do at least enjoy the levels that are good. But then there's the minigames, which are passable at best. The game's also noticeably missing some things from the original and the other remakes. Because of all that, I really don't know what to make of this game. Do I call it a replace for improving the sound and adding new content? Do I call it a remap for not including a bunch of things that really should have been there? I guess ultimately I find myself somewhere in between. Remake. This is a good remake where it counts, and it at least tries to add some worthwhile things to the mix. If the game had included all the missing features, and perhaps made the minigames a little more enjoyable, then I wouldn't hesitate to call this game a replace. Regardless, I'm willing to accept the viewpoints of those who feel it's a remat or a replace. But how do I feel about DKC3 as a game on its own? Again, I have a lot of mixed feelings. So much so that I actually played through the SNES version twice, once going for 103% and a second time just playing the game like normal. And you know what? When you're just playing through all the levels and not bothering with the side quests, this game is pretty damn fun. Sure, the third tier does cause the game to lower in quality towards the midpoint, but even that doesn't stop me from enjoying the game as a whole. The graphics are great, the bosses are excellent, the overall level design is strong, there's plenty of variety, and while the SNES soundtrack isn't my favorite in the world, it's still at least decent. Nevertheless, I can't bring myself to totally ignore the game's many flaws. The camera presents a frequent problem, the enemy placement can be really obnoxious, and the animal buddies feel downgraded. I also can't say I enjoy playing DKC3 to full completion. The bonus rooms ruin the flow of the game and make the more frustrating levels in the game even more frustrating. Krematoa is also mildly annoying at its very best, and in the end your only real reward for 103%ing this game is a secret ending that really doesn't cap off the trilogy all that well. While my first experience with the Donkey Kong Country series was the first game on GBA, it was with Donkey Kong Country 3 on GBA where I really fell in love with this series. It is because of this game that I'm as big of a Donkey Kong fan as I am today. And I had every intention coming into this review of explaining why I felt that Donkey Kong Country 3, especially on GBA, was this underrated gem that never quite got the credit it deserved. But sometimes giving a game you like some time and distance can allow you to notice some flaws that you couldn't see before. And I regret to say that Donkey Kong Country 3 is one of those cases for me. I really want to love this game, I really do, but I try to maintain some semblance of objectivity when reviewing games, and I can't bring myself to ignore this game's flaws just for the sake of writing the review I want to write. That being said, this game is far from terrible, and I might even say it's better than many people give it credit for. As I've said before, sometimes it's worth taking the bad with the good for the sake of enjoying a game that's worth enjoying, and DKC3 is a game worth enjoying. I'm willing to put up with a handful of bad levels and a situationally bad camera for a game that's mostly good. Would I recommend this game? Well, if you enjoyed the first two, then I'd say yes. Just don't touch the bonus rooms and I think you'll have a decent time. If you didn't care for either of the first two games, then I don't think DKC3 is going to do anything to change your mind. As before, the SNES version is available on Wii U Virtual Console, and the GBA version is relatively inexpensive on Amazon and eBay. I say that if you're interested, then go for it.